Shern Min Chow covered the original trial back in 2004 and shows us why this made national headlines.
Welcome to Watch Mojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the most infamous cases where a woman was alleged to have killed either one or multiple romantic partners.
Then police do a little digging, and to their surprise, they find that David Castor leaves everything to his wife Stacey Castor and her two daughters.
Judi Buenoano. Sometimes it's not so great to be a trailblazer.
All of her victims loved and trusted her, but she only saw them as money in the bank.
Judi Buenoano possesses the infamous distinction of being Florida's first female victim of the electric chair. This death sentence was handed out in connection to the death of Buenoano's husband, James Goodyear. The list of Buenoano's casualties doesn't stop there, however, since she was also convicted of murdering her son, Michael.
She was found guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to life without parole.
This serial killer was also linked to the deaths of at least two other boyfriends, with the methodology routinely being that of arsenic poisoning. Buenoano's home life as a child was allegedly one that involved routine abuse, to the point where she was imprisoned as a teenager for attacking her father and stepfamily.
She ends up serving 60 days in a jail facility for this attack on her parents.
Belle Gunness. There is a long list of victims that have been attributed or at least connected to the murder spree of Belle Gunness. Speculations from investigators and researchers place the number between 14 and 40. Insurance payouts seem to have played a big part in many of Gunness's insidious plans, with multiple husbands and even children suffering fatal accidents while living on her property. It wasn't until after Gunness's own demise in a house fire that authorities uncovered bags containing human remains buried in the ground. We should actually say supposed demise, since the corpse investigators claimed to be Gunness was headless and differed in physical details. This has led some to surmise that she escaped from the burning house to kill again. Catherine Knight. The trial and subsequent conviction of Catherine Knight in 2001 resulted in her being the first woman in Australian history to be sentenced to life imprisonment without parole.
She'd shown no remorse. She had not acknowledged that she had any problem at all. Such a person, if released, is not unlikely to do the same again.
This was in connection to Knight's gruesome killing of her partner, John Charles Thomas Price, the year prior. Knight allegedly intended to put her skills as an abattoir worker to use, serving Price's remains to his children for dinner.
There's a meal on the table, for God's sake. There's vegetables, there's gravy, there's his meat, which he's cooked in the oven.
This, thankfully, never came to pass, but Knight's history of violence actually dated back to previous romantic partners, including the alleged attempted strangling of her first husband. Meanwhile, Knight also intentionally killed a dog belonging to boyfriend David Saunders and attacked the latter with a pair of scissors, stabbing him in the stomach.
She didn't care when she crossed the line. That was the whole thing. She was completely without remorse when she would do these terrible things.
Chisako Kakehi. The idea that female murderers primarily utilize poison is something of a misconception when it comes to the hard data and facts.
She has the face of a grandmother, but police say the mind of a killer. Chisako Kakehi, a 67-year-old Japanese millionaire with a long list of dead lovers.
However, that doesn't mean that there isn't at least some truth to this stereotype, as evidence from Japan's Chisako Kakehi. Authorities in that country claim that Kakehi is responsible for deaths of at least 7 romantic partners.
Here in Japan, the media is calling Kakehi the Black Widow, with dead lovers ranging from 54 to 75.
Motives in these cases were historically seen as financial, specifically insurance money windfalls. Kakehi's methodology seemed to be cyanide poisoning, with no less than 3 of her lovers succumbing to the effects of the drug after becoming involved with Japan's septuagenarian Black Widow.
Since then, police say she's gotten rich, collecting insurance money and inheritances from her late lovers, men who, according to authorities, fell in love and paid the ultimate price.
Evelyn Dick. The body of Evelyn Dick's former husband John was in atrocious shape back when it was uncovered by a group of Canadian children back in the early 1940s. The Dicks' marriage was a short one, and notable for Evelyn's romantic liaison with another man, Bill Bohozic. only days after tying the knot. Meanwhile, John's dismembered remains were whittled down to a torso, and Evelyn's trial was a sensationalized and salacious media frenzy. This resulted in a conviction, which was overturned, with an acquittal coming from a retrial. A second trial for the mummified fetal corpse found on her property resulted in an 11-year prison stay. Susan Wright. The trial of Susan Lucille Wright was one that vacillated between two stories, one of self-defense and the other cold-blooded murder.
Prosecutors said the unhappy wife had lured her husband, Jeffrey Wright, to his deathbed with the promise of romance.
Wright's lawyer stated that her marriage to Jeffrey Wright was one under which Susan suffered physical violence. Thus, the admitted stabbing of this husband that took place while the latter was bound to his marital bed was committed out of fear.
She buried her husband in their Northwest Harris County backyard in a hole he had dug for a home improvement project.
The prosecution, meanwhile, painted Wright as someone who intentionally murdered her husband, although it should be said that the former did voluntarily turn herself in to the authorities after meeting with her counsel. The jury eventually convicted Susan Wright to 25 years, a sentence that was reduced to 20, and from which Wright emerged on parole in 2020.
The 44-year-old was released on parole this morning after serving more than 16 of her 20-year sentence for murder.
Stacey Castor. We can't imagine that it's a very pleasant method of death, being fed antifreeze. Yet that's allegedly what Stacey Castor did to not one, but two of her husbands.
I knew at that point we had a double homicide, and Stacey Castor probably killed both her husbands.
Toxicology reports for both Michael Wallace and David Castor reported positive for antifreeze poisoning. The case of the latter is particularly troubling, however, since it was alleged that Stacey Castor forcibly locked her husband in a room and force-fed him the poison when he became too weak from malnourishment to resist.
One of the things that jumped out at us was the turkey baster.
They send the turkey baster for testing, and lo and behold,
it turns out that there was antifreeze inside that turkey baster. One of the other puzzling things was David's DNA was on the tip of that turkey baster.
It was initially surmised that David Castor's death was self-inflicted, but the truth came out during the trial, and Stacey Castor was sentenced to 51 years to life. The severity of this sentence was also impacted by the alleged poisoning of her daughter, Ashley.
Unlike many defendants who pass through my courtroom, you're not just a danger to the general public, you're a danger to the people who love you and are closest to you. And I believe that the sentence I'm about to impose will remove that danger once and for all.
Nanny Doss. A 1954 mugshot of Nancy Hazel, aka Nanny Doss, is all it really takes to underline this serial killer's reputation as the giggling granny. The slightly sinister smirk on Doss's face belies the fact that she was allegedly responsible for at least 11 murders. 4 separate husbands died while being married to Nanny Doss, while the latter also confessed to killing her mother, sister, mother-in-law, and grandson. A recurring theme of insurance money returns here, the seeming motive for the death of Nanny's final husband, Samuel Doss, from arsenic poisoning during his brief fatal marriage. Insurance also was related to others of the deaths. Betty Lou Beets. The woman-born Betty Lou Dunavant was married 5 times, twice to the same man, prior to tying the knot with Jimmy Don Beets in 1982. That aforementioned double marriage to Bill York Lane resulted in Betty shooting her husband, although he did survive the attack. This wasn't the case with Doyle Wayne Barker, Beets' 4th spouse, whose remains were found on her property, alongside the body of Jimmy Don Beets. Both bodies had similar-looking gunshot wounds. Beets was found guilty and sentenced to death in 1985, but the long appeals process meant that the method of lethal injection wasn't carried out until 15 years later, on February 24, 2000. Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Amy Archer Gilligan. It is true that Amy Archer Gilligan, née Duggan, was convicted of poisoning her husband Michael. However, dozens of other reported individuals died while residents of a nursing home under Archer Gilligan's care.
Between 1911 and 1916, 48 people died. So you can see that the death rate was really increasing.
those numbers raising eyebrows.
Traces of arsenic and strychnine were found by forensic officials that examined several deaths at the Archer home for the elderly and infirm. Stranger still was how some of these victims were convinced, while presumably lucid enough, to sign over their life insurance policies to Archer Gilligan. Her initial conviction was overturned on a retrial and insanity defense, with Archer Gilligan being sent to a mental hospital until the end of her days,
leading Archer to face 2 rounds of murder trials and ultimately being sentenced to life in prison.
Is the term Black Widow still relevant in the modern day? Or is its gender specificity reductive by current societal standards? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.
It's a cold-blooded event.